I remember the exact moment when I realised something was wrong. It was on a Tuesday morning. I had just walked into the office kitchen to grab my usual cup of coffee, and I felt the shift in the air. People who normally smiled at me barely looked up. Two co-workers whispered as I passed and quickly changed the subject, and my stomach dropped. I knew that feeling. That heavy silence that follows you like a shadow. But I had no idea yet just how deep the betrayal went. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe someone was in a bad mood. Maybe I was overthinking. But then Sarah, my best friend, or at least the person I thought was my best friend, sent me a text that just said, "We need to talk." And my heart pounded in my chest because nothing good ever comes after a message like that. Sarah and I had been inseparable for years. We met in college during freshman orientation, bonded over our shared love for cheap diner coffee and late-night study sessions. She was the one who held my hair back after too many shots at my 21st birthday. The one who cried with me when my dad had his first heart attack. The one who told me I deserved better when my ex cheated. So how could it be that this same person would later turn my life into a nightmare? I still remember our tiny college apartment, the smell of burnt popcorn in the microwave, the way we would play bad reality TV shows in the background just for the noise while we sat on the floor surrounded by highlighters and flashcards. She wasn't just a friend, she was family, at least in my eyes. That's what made the whole thing so unbearable. The fact that the knife in my back came from someone I let so close. When she asked me to meet that night at our usual spot, the little bar with sticky tables and neon lights buzzing faintly above, I didn't hesitate. I thought maybe she was stressed or upset. Maybe she just needed to vent like old times. But the second I saw her face, I knew something had changed. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold, like she was holding something back and enjoying it. She leaned in and said in this calm, almost rehearsed voice, "I think you should know people are talking." And the way she said it made me freeze because it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like she was planting something. I asked her what she meant, and she just shrugged, swirling the straw in her drink, and told me that she had heard I was sleeping with one of our married co-workers, that I was desperate for attention, that I had a drinking problem, things that weren't just lies but attacks on my character, and my hand started shaking so hard I nearly spilled my glass of water. I remember the sticky condensation dripping onto the table, how my throat went dry, how I laughed nervously because I thought it had to be some cruel misunderstanding. But then she looked at me dead in the eye and said, "Honestly, people believe it because it sounds like something you'd do." And in that moment, my world tilted. I went home that night and sat on my bed staring at the wall, the hum of the fridge in the other room, the only sound, and I replayed every moment of our friendship, trying to find the crack where things went wrong. Because how do you go from being sisters in everything but blood to being enemies without even realising it? I didn't sleep, I just lay there with the glow of my phone on the nightstand, scrolling through texts and memories, trying to figure out if I had missed some sign, if she had been jealous, if I had said something careless. But no matter how far back I went, nothing explained the cruelty of spreading those lies. By the next morning, the rumours had already spread further. Someone avoided sitting next to me in the break room. Another person made a joke that cut too close. And I realised Sarah hadn't just told me about the lies. She was the one behind them, feeding them, watching them grow like poison vines wrapping around my reputation. The hardest part wasn't even hearing the rumours. It was the way people looked at me differently. Like everything they thought they knew about me had been erased and replaced with Sarah's version of me. And I couldn't defend myself because if you shout too loud, people assume you're guilty. And if you stay quiet, they assume it's true. I remember sitting in a meeting, trying to focus on the numbers on the screen, but all I could feel were the stares, the little smirks when my name came up, the whispered comments when someone leaned close to another and I wanted to crawl out of my skin. It's strange how quickly your world can tilt. One day you're respected and trusted. The next you're treated like a stranger, and all because one person decided to light a match and walk away while everything burned. What made it worse was that Sarah acted like nothing had changed between us. She still texted me funny memes, still asked about my weekend, but I could feel the distance, like she was testing how much she could take from me before I broke. I replayed our conversation over and over, especially the way she said people believed the lies, because it sounded like something I'd do. And that line cut deeper than anything else, because it meant she never really saw me the way I saw her. Late at night, I sat on the couch in the dark, with only the streetlight filtering through the blinds, and I thought about the first time I ever trusted her. The way I told her secrets I never told anyone else. And now those secrets felt like weapons in her hands. She knew my insecurities. She knew how much I cared about how people saw me. She knew I struggled with anxiety after my parents' divorce, and I hated myself for ever letting her that close. At work, I tried to pretend everything was normal, but even the little things changed. Someone would cut me off mid-sentence. Another would give me a look like they pitied me. And slowly I started eating lunch alone in my car instead of in the rake room. My car became my safe place. The faint smell of old coffee in the cup holder, the worn-out seat covers, the radio turned low just to drown out my thoughts, and I'd sit there scrolling on my phone pretending I had texts to answer, when really I just didn't want anyone to see me sitting alone. The silence was loud though, louder than the laughter I could hear when I passed the cafeteria. And every time I caught Sarah laughing with someone else, it twisted in my chest. I kept asking myself why, what she gained from this, because I never competed with her. I never tried to outshine her. If anything, I always lifted her up. She was the one I bragged about to others, telling people how smart she was, how strong she was after her breakup. And I couldn't reconcile that version of her with the person who was tearing me down. I thought about confronting her again, but the truth was I was scared. Scared that she'd twist my words, scared that she'd use my anger as proof that I was unstable. Because once a lie is planted, even your truest reactions can be spun into something ugly. So instead, I stayed quiet, swallowing my anger like stones, but inside I was breaking. Every day a little more. One night I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sat on my bedroom floor with my back against the dresser, the carpet rough against my legs, and I just cried until my throat hurt. Because the weight of silence was heavier than the lies themselves. I thought about calling Sarah, begging her to stop, reminding her of everything we had been through. But then I realised she already knew. She knew exactly how much it would hurt me, and she did it anyway. That's when it hit me that maybe this wasn't sudden. Maybe she had been building resentment for years, and I just never noticed. I remembered little moments, like the time she snapped when I got a promotion before her, or the way her smile never fully reached her eyes when people complimented me, and I wondered if jealousy had been growing in her like a shadow all along. The next morning, I forced myself to look in the mirror before leaving for work, my eyes red and swollen, and I whispered to myself that I wasn't the person they said I was, that I knew the truth, even if no one else cared, but the reflection staring back at me didn't look convinced. At the office, things kept getting worse. I overheard someone say they didn't trust me with important projects. Another person made a cruel joke about me, needing another drink, and I felt this crushing urge to scream, but instead I swallowed it because screaming would only make me look guilty. I started to avoid people, taking different hallways, staying late just so I wouldn't run into the groups that lingered by the elevators. And in the quiet of those late nights, I sometimes stood by the big glass windows, staring at the city lights, wondering how one friendship could collapse into this much destruction. My family noticed too. When I visited my mum, she asked why I seemed distracted, why I wasn't laughing the way I used to, and I lied. I told her work was just stressful. Because how could I explain that the girl she once called her second daughter had turned into my biggest enemy? I thought about quitting, packing up my desk and walking away from all of it. But then I reminded myself that leaving would only make her win. It would prove the lies true in everyone's mind. So I stayed, even though every day felt like walking through fire, hoping that maybe the truth would find its way out on its own. One Friday afternoon, things reached a breaking point. I walked into the office kitchen and heard my name followed by laughter. I froze behind the doorway just long enough to catch one of the guys imitating me, pretending to stumble like I was drunk, and Sarah's laugh was the loudest of them all. It felt like the floor dropped out beneath me, like every good memory we ever shared had been erased in that sound. I walked out before they saw me, my hands trembling so bad I spilled hot coffee on my sleeve, and in that moment I realised this wasn't just rumours anymore, it was entertainment for them. And she was the star of the show. That night I sat at my desk scrolling through old photos of us, the road trips, the birthday candles, the endless selfies, and I couldn't stop asking myself how someone who once called me her sister could humiliate me so openly. I remembered the time she called me crying after her breakup, and I drove an hour just to sit with her. No questions asked, or the time I lent her money when she couldn't pay rent, never expecting it back, and I wondered if she ever thought about those moments while tearing me apart. My body carried the stress everywhere, my shoulders tight, my chest heavy, headaches that came every night, and I hated that she still had so much control over me, even when I tried to pretend I didn't care. At work, I stopped talking unless I had to. I kept my eyes on my computer, eating in silence while laughter filled the room, and I could feel myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller each day. My safe place was still my car, parked in the corner of the lot, where I would sit with the windows cracked just enough to feel the breeze, clutching a bottle of water like it was the only thing keeping me steady. Sometimes I imagined confronting her in front of everyone, shouting the truth, exposing her lies, but then fear would grip me, fear that they wouldn't believe me, that they'd laugh harder, that she'd twist it and say I was paranoid. I started writing in a journal at night, pouring every thought onto the page, the ink smudging when my tears hit the paper, and even though it didn't solve anything, it felt like I was at least reclaiming my voice, even if no one else would hear it. And in those quiet hours, with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the scratching of my pen, I promised myself I wouldn't let her destroy me completely, even if I didn't yet know how to fight back. The following week, something happened that finally pushed me past the point of silence. Our manager called me into his office, his voice calm but his eyes sharp, and he asked me directly if I was struggling with alcohol or if I had been inappropriate with a coworker. My chest went cold, my face burned, and I stumbled over my words because I couldn't believe it had gotten this far. The lies had made their way into official conversations, into places where my career and reputation were on the line. I told him none of it was true, that I had no idea where it started, but I could tell by the way he looked at me that doubt had already planted itself in his mind. After that meeting, I sat in the restroom stall for almost an hour, staring at the faint graffiti on the door, trying to steady my breathing while the fluorescent light flickered above me. And I thought, this is exactly what she wanted, to watch me crumble. That night, I drove home with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the radio on, but nothing registering, just the echo of his words looping in my head. When I got home, I threw my bag on the couch and paced the living room, the shadows stretching across the walls, and for the first time I felt a surge of anger stronger than the fear. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for Sarah, every time I put her first, every time I covered for her mistakes, and I realised she wasn't just spreading rumours, she was rewriting the story of who I was, and I couldn't let her be the author anymore. I called my mum that evening, and though I didn't tell her everything, I admitted that someone I trusted had betrayed me, And hearing her voice soft and steady on the other end gave me a tiny spark of strength. She reminded me that character shows in time, that lies eventually unravel, but I wasn't sure I could wait that long. I started considering ways to defend myself. Maybe talking to HR, maybe confronting Sarah in front of others, but part of me still hesitated. Because once you step into that fight, you can't go back. And I was terrified of what she might do if she felt cornered. Still, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above, I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. Silence was killing me more than her lies ever could. The next morning, I decided I needed to take back at least a small piece of control. So I started documenting everything. Every strange look, every cruel comment, every time Sarah's words twisted their way back to me. I kept a folder on my laptop with dates and details, like building a case, even if I wasn't sure yet who I would show it to. It gave me a sense of purpose, like I wasn't just drowning in whispers, but actually swimming towards something solid. At lunch, I overheard two co-workers talking about me again. One of them saying, "Well, Sarah wouldn't make it up. She knows her better than anyone." And that sentence hit me like a punch. She was using our friendship as credibility, twisting our history into proof of her lies. That evening, I went back through my journal, the messy handwriting smeared with old tears, and I noticed a pattern. Her jealousy had been there in small ways for years. The time she accused me of flirting with her crush, even though I barely spoke to him. The way she got quiet when I bought a new car. Even the snide comments about how lucky I was that my family supported me. I realised luck had nothing to do with it. I had worked for everything I had. But in her mind, it was always a competition I didn't even know I was part of. At work, I tried to keep my head high, even when laughter followed me down the hallway. And I reminded myself that silence didn't mean weakness, it meant I was gathering strength. My nights became a strange routine. Shower, dinner, then hours sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, writing down everything I could remember. Sometimes I would look at the clock and realise it was 2 a.m, the street outside empty, the hum of the fridge the only sound, and still I couldn't stop writing. As if putting it on paper kept me from disappearing. One night I dreamed about confronting her, standing in front of everyone and telling the truth. And I woke up with my heart racing, realising that maybe the dream was a preview of what I had to do. A few days later, I finally reached my breaking point. I was standing by the copy machine when I heard Sarah's voice drifting from the hallway. She was telling someone that she had covered for me again, because apparently I had shown up late drunk, and the person laughed and said I was a mess. My chest went tight, my hands shook so hard I dropped the stack of papers. They scattered across the floor like everything else in my life was falling apart, and in that moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her write my story anymore. That evening, I stayed late at the office, waiting until most people had left. And I printed every note I had collected, screenshots of texts where she contradicted herself, messages from others who hinted they didn't fully believe her, and I organised it all into a neat folder. It felt both terrifying and empowering, like loading ammunition before a battle I never wanted to fight. On my drive home, I passed by the little diner we used to go to in college. The neon sign flickering, and memories rushed back of us sitting in that booth sharing fries and secrets. For a second I almost cried, grieving the friendship that once felt unbreakable. But then anger burned away the sadness, because she chose this. She chose to destroy me. That night I barely slept, my mind racing with what I'd say if I confronted her, how I'd hold my voice steady, even if my heart was breaking. The next morning I walked into the office with the folder in my bag, my palms sweating. But I felt a strange calm too, like I had finally decided to stop being her victim. I kept imagining the moment I'd hand over the evidence, how her face would shift when the lies unravelled, and that vision carried me through the day. Every time she looked at me with that fake, sweet smile, I almost laughed because I knew the mask was about to crack. That afternoon, the chance finally came. Our manager called for a team meeting. Everyone gathered around the long conference table, the hum of the projector filling the silence. And Sarah sat across from me, with that smug little grin she always wore lately. My hands trembled under the table as I clutched the folder. But I reminded myself this was the moment I had been preparing for. When the meeting ended and people started to leave, I asked the manager if I could have a word. Sarah lingered too, curious, like she knew something was coming. I handed over the folder, my voice steady even though my stomach churned, and I explained that there had been rumours about me that weren't true, that I had gathered proof of contradictions and falsehoods, and I wanted it on record. Sarah's smile faltered for the first time in weeks, her eyes narrowing as the manager flipped through the papers. He didn't say much, only that he would review it, but I saw the doubt in his eyes begin to shift away from me, and for the first time I felt like I had cracked open a door she had slammed shut. Afterwards, Sarah cornered me in the hallway, her tone sharp and low. "You really think this will save you?" she hissed, and I met her gaze, refusing to look away. My voice shook, but I said, "It's not about saving me. It's about exposing you." And the flicker of anger in her eyes told me she finally realised I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. That night at home, I lit a candle in my room, sat cross-legged on the floor, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, not even close, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my truth. I thought about the years we had shared, the laughter, the secrets, and I knew I couldn't ever get that back. But I could at least make sure the world saw me for who I really was, not for the lies she dressed me in. And that thought gave me the strength to keep going, no matter how messy it got. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at work began to shift in small but noticeable ways. People who once avoided me started making casual conversation again. A few even asked if I wanted to join them for lunch, and while the whispers didn't stop completely, they carried less weight now, like the wind had changed direction. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed unsettled, her laugh louder than usual, her words sharper, as if she was trying to claw back the control she was losing. One morning I found a sticky note on my desk that just said "liar" in messy handwriting, and even though it rattled me, I tucked it into my folder of evidence, because I knew keeping track of every detail mattered. I also started noticing cracks in her performance, moments where her stories didn't align. Like when she told one person I was seen at a bar on Friday night, but told another I had skipped work Monday because of a hangover, the timelines collapsing under their own weight. I began to quietly correct the record when I had the chance, not by arguing, but by calmly stating facts. Like mentioning I spent Friday night with my mom, or showing emails I had sent early Monday morning. The truth didn't need drama, it just needed consistency. And slowly people started piecing it together. At home, I still struggled with the weight of it all, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering why she hated me enough to go this far. But I reminded myself the why no longer mattered. What mattered was reclaiming my voice. One evening, as I sat writing in my journal, the sound of rain tapping against the window, I realised something powerful. I wasn't just fighting to clear my name. I was learning to stand up for myself in ways I never had before. Sarah had taken so much from me, but without meaning to, she had also forced me to find a strength I didn't know I carried. That thought didn't erase the pain, but it lit a small fire inside me, one I knew would only grow brighter. The turning point came one Thursday morning when HR called me into their office, the air heavy with that corporate stiffness, the blinds half closed so the sunlight cut the room into stripes. They told me they had reviewed my file, that they had spoken with several co-workers, And while they couldn't erase the damage already done, they wanted me to know the rumours weren't holding up under scrutiny. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in months, like I had been holding my breath underwater and finally surfaced. Sarah, they said carefully, would also be spoken to, and though they didn't reveal details, I could sense the tide turning. When I walked out of that office, my legs trembled, but not from fear this time. From relief and adrenaline. Later that day, I caught her glaring at me across the room. Her smile gone, her eyes sharp like broken glass, and I realised she knew she was losing her grip. That weekend, I drove out of the city to clear my head. Windows down, the smell of summer fields rushing through the car, and I thought about all the nights I had cried myself to sleep because of her. Somewhere between the rolling hills and the quiet roads, I promised myself I would never let anyone take my voice away again. On Sunday, I cleaned my apartment, organising drawers I had ignored for months, tossing out old receipts and papers, and it felt symbolic, like I was clearing out the chaos she had brought into my life. In the evening, I lit a candle, sat at my desk, and wrote myself a letter, reminding myself of who I really was. Loyal, hard-working, someone who loved deeply, even if it left me vulnerable. That letter wasn't for anyone else, just for me. Proof that I hadn't lost myself completely. Monday came, and with it a strange calm. Co-workers greeted me like normal, and the tension that once filled every corner of the office seemed lighter. The lies hadn't disappeared, but they no longer owned me, and that difference was everything. I knew the fight wasn't finished, but for the first time I believed I could win. The fallout came quicker than I expected. A week after my meeting with HR, the whispers had almost completely shifted direction. People weren't questioning me anymore. They were questioning her. I overheard 2 co-workers in the break room saying her stories didn't match, that she seemed obsessed with tearing me down, and the tone in their voices carried doubt where before there had been certainty. Sarah noticed too. Her energy became frantic. She laughed too loud, interrupted conversations, and once even tried to corner me with a fake smile, asking if we could talk like old times. I looked her straight in the eye and told her calmly, "Old times don't exist anymore," and walked away. My heart pounded after, but I felt powerful in a way I hadn't in months. At night, I reflected on everything, writing pages in my journal about how betrayal can break you, but also teach you who you are. I remembered the small details that used to comfort me. Sharing popcorn on her couch, singing badly in the car, and I grieved them, but I also accepted that those memories belonged to a version of her that no longer existed. Around the office, the balance of power shifted more every day. Colleagues started inviting me into projects again, asking my opinion, even apologising quietly for believing lies too quickly. It wasn't perfect. The scars were still there, but I felt myself breathing easier. One afternoon, our manager asked me to stay behind after a meeting. He thanked me for handling everything with professionalism, and while part of me wanted to scream about how unfair it had been, another part felt proud that I hadn't let her destroy me completely. Sarah, on the other hand, looked smaller every day, her words desperate, her eyes darting like she was waiting for someone to catch her. And maybe that was the sweetest justice, not revenge in the dramatic sense, but watching her unravel in the very web she spun. At home, I cooked myself dinner, something I hadn't done in weeks, filling my apartment with the smell of garlic and rosemary. And for the first time I felt warmth return to my space. It wasn't over, but I knew how this story would end. I would walk away stronger, and she would be left with the wreckage she created. The final breaking point came on a grey Monday morning. HR called both of us in at the same time, the room heavy with silence, as the director laid out the findings of their review. They said there had been multiple inconsistencies in Sarah's statements, that several employees had admitted they felt pressured by her stories. And though no one used the word guilty, the message was clear. Her lies had caught up with her. She sat stiff in her chair, her face pale but her eyes darting with anger. And for a moment I almost felt pity. But then I remembered every night I cried myself to sleep, every moment I doubted my worth, and that pity dissolved into something sharper. They didn't fire her that day, but they put her on probation, removed her from a project she wanted desperately, and the office buzzed quietly with the news. People avoided her, the same way they once avoided me, and I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness, because no victory could erase the scars she left. After the meeting, I walked out into the sunlight, the air cool on my face, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel the weight of shame pressing on my chest. At home that evening, I sat with my journal and wrote, "The truth always rises," underlined it twice, and closed the notebook with a finality that felt like closure. A part of me wanted to confront her again, to ask her why, to demand an explanation. But I realised I didn't need one anymore. The why didn't matter. The choices she made defined her more than any answer could. Instead, I poured my energy back into myself, into late evening walks listening to music, into dinners with friends I had avoided out of fear, into small rituals that reminded me of who I was before the lies. Slowly, the laughter in my life returned, the kind that made my stomach hurt, and the light in my apartment didn't feel so dim. Sarah barely spoke to me now, her voice quieter, her presence weaker, and I realised the best revenge wasn't destroying her. It was living freely, without her shadow hanging over me. Months later, when a new opportunity came at work, I was chosen to lead it, and the round of applause I received at the conference room felt like a full circle moment. She had tried to erase me, but instead she revealed a strength I didn't know I had. And as I drove home that night, city lights glowing outside my window, I whispered to myself, never again will I let someone else write my story.